fantastic that the AI is coming for entry-level media jobs. Early in my career, when I spent 20, 30, 40 hours a week, like building campaign shells, or like, do you remember when we were in the London office and I literally melted out of my chair and cried on the floor because Excel crashed and I lost my bulk sheet upload? Who is sad or worried about losing that job? Yes, AI is absolutely going to take the bottom 70% of bullshit churn content production.
Welcome to Punchy by Rival, where we take the gloves off to share the hard-hitting realities of the challenger marketing world. Each week, we'll break down the buzz and cut through the BS of the top stories and trends to tell you what you really need to know and do differently to grow your brand and career. Welcome to a new and improved Punchy. We are coming at you with a brand new format for this show. And actually, this is the first time that we've done it. This is kind of weird, actually. We're doing it live. We're doing it in person. I like it. We are coming to you live from the fantastic 11FS studio here in London. And shameless plug, if you're in London and you do a podcast, you should definitely check out the studio here. It's fantastic. But what we are doing with Punchy is instead of talking about news every week, instead we're going to source questions from you all, and every other week have a bit more of an in-depth show answering your questions. And of course, a lot of them, including some of the questions that we have for today, are talking about what's going on in the news of marketing and in our industry, but some of them are just more general. And we think, and having tested this before and gotten some of your feedback, we think this is going to be more valuable to you. So please let us know what you think.
That's the confidence we're looking for on how well it's going to work. We think this is going to be better.
Strong opinions weekly held, right? Isn't that what we talk about? Except for Jenna, which is strong opinions strongly held.
Yeah.
Potentially, incrementally, this may be an improvement.
Anyway, let's get into the show. So from all of the questions that we sourced from you all, and thank you if you did submit them, we picked 6 questions that we're going to get into. The first one is going to be, what do you think, or what do we think, about the Bud Light Transgender Influencer campaign and subsequent backlash? So if you haven't seen the story, Bud Light, as part of the massive influencer marketing investment and campaigns that they run, they did one partnership with a pretty well-known trans influencer and shipped her custom cans that were then posted on social. And there's been a lot of backlash and a lot of conversation about that. So DuBose, I'm going to start with you. What do you think about this campaign and the subsequent conversation from it?
I think the conversation has really exposed probably the delta between who we think drinks Bud Light and who actually drinks Bud Light. I think, it is intriguing that the ideological Bud Light consumer is considered by most people as the outraged Alabama native who, along with Kid Rock, has been blowing up 6-packs of beer they most certainly just bought at Walmart and are not going to get their money back now. And I think it's intriguing that actually, Bud Light as a whole is just drunk by apathetic beer drinkers everywhere across the United States, really.
Should go with that as a slogan. I mean,
it's not bad. It's widely available. It's like if you don't if you don't feel strongly about beer, this is a beer for you. And I think it's intriguing that a lot of large brands like this suffer from the idea that they're known, and whenever they do anything that is new, when they do anything that deviates from what people know, there's going to be an inevitable backlash. And I think, this is definitely one where it was an array of influencers, so it's not like there was a defined strategy to activate here. I think instead it was picked up because it's a cultural fault line at the moment. And they've been pulled into something where, a lot of people did not expect this from a brand like Bud Light. And if you look at the response from the CEO, I don't think the CEO expected this from a brand like Bud Light. I think everyone has the tone of almost doing yard work with this. They've stumbled out of the HQ, kind of shrugged and gone, is this still here? And then gone back in hoping tomorrow it ends. So I think, it's one of those things where I think there's a cultural story that really goes in the wrong direction of who's the target audience. B, I think the brand itself did not want to end up here, but it does really highlight the idea that known brands are going to struggle to do anything that deviates from the norm. And C, I think at this point, it's just going to go back to normal in a few months, right? Like the audience that was burning Nikes a few years ago is now blowing up 6-packs of Bud Light. God knows what's next, but I'm sure give it a few months and there'll be something that's going to be sold out at the Dollar Tree next to the plastic explosive.
But it is interesting because and I'm pulling from, I found an article on CNN we can also include in the show notes, but the VP of marketing for Bud Light at Anheuser-Busch InBev went on a podcast and talked about the campaign. And Bud Light actually has been doing partnerships and campaigns and initiatives with the LGBTQ plus community for a long time now, right? And so often with these things, in terms of marketing backlash, there is the mess ups, let's say, the clearly wrong, somebody made a mistake types of things that people react to. And then there's these things that have been going on for a long time. And for whatever it is, it just happens to kind of hit the right person at the right time and it blows up into something else. But I think there's actually, and I'm going to stick with you, DuBose, because there's an interesting question here. I know we've been doing a lot of research on kind of like share of search and one-off. We always talk about the Colin Kaepernick example as like one-off bursts of activity around a brand and whether or not that leads to sustained growth or decline. Do you think something like this is good or bad for the brand, or is it too early to tell? Like, what would your take be on that?
I think given the scale of something like Bud Light, this is something where, and it's something we see with a lot of brands when we monitor share of search. There's going to be a peak over the next few weeks of PR coverage, of interest. It's going to return to the mean. In the same way that Nike afterwards, you saw a share of search that basically over time gradually increased, but we're talking months and years, not days and weeks. I think you're going to see a similar thing here from Bud Light. It's just widely distributed kind of beer that doesn't get a strong reaction from a lot of people. I think we're going to go back to that. I mean, you look at Southwest over Christmas in the United States with the cancellation of large amounts of flights and absolute crisis from the brand. Share of search and market share for Southwest is kind of just ticked along because everyone went, well, I still want cheap travel. So I think at a certain point, this is too widely distributed for people to go, actually, I'm giving up on it completely. And a lot of the time, it probably wasn't the first choice you felt strongly about choosing anyway when it comes to alcohol brands.
I feel strongly about choosing Bud Light for the circumstances where I'm floating down the river all day and I want to drink 12 beers, that's exactly what Bud Light is for.
I think that's actually an audience segmentation that I've seen in a Bud Light.
That is a universal psychographic segmentation of people who want to float down the river and drink 12 beers.
Tubin.
Exactly. Tubin. Bud Light is the perfect beer for that.
That hasn't really made it over to the UK yet. Maybe we should start a trend.
We absolutely should. I feel like
it's too cold to tube.
Yeah, probably. No, I was really excited to talk about this one, mostly for the marketer backlash to this. Like, I'm not going to comment. I mean, Bud Light has been doing these types of programs for forever. But I, as the meme consumer that I am, was really interested in following the advertising account, meme accounts on Instagram and a bunch of other places who were like, oh, this is such a horrible misplay from Bud. They don't understand their core consumer. It's such a strategic misstep to try and expand your audience before servicing your core audience. To DuBose's point, Bud Light is the number one beer in America. I think it has something like 17% market share, right? That is not entirely on the backs of conservative, angry Alabamians or also people who may be tubing down the river and drinking 12 beers. That's not the point. Bud Light is literally for everybody. At the point where you are the most mass market beer, yes, you are going to be doing marketing for literally everyone. Something like 55% of people under the age of 30 have had a Bud Light in the last 3 months or something ridiculous. The idea again that, they've alienated their core audience. Who fucking cares? Anheuser-Busch is still going to announce a dividend payment of something like 75 cents a share at their next earnings call. This matters 0%. This is absolutely that gif of Woody Harrelson crying and wiping his tears away with money. This is such a non-controversy. And I'm still going to drink Bud Light floating down the river this summer with my friends, regardless of what kind of stance they take on these particular social issues, although I absolutely do support them supporting the LGBTQ plus community. But yeah, I just really thought it was really ironic that marketers were accusing the Bud Light marketing team of this is marketing bias, that you guys you're this liberal elite in New York and London and you think that that the LGBTQ plus community wants to drink Bud Light. That's wrong. That is in itself marketer bias to not realize that actually, yes, trans, LGBTQ, plus whoever, queer people also drink Bud Light because queer people also want to float down the river and drink 12 beers. That's a universal. It's a universal psychographic desire.
If there's anything that brings us together, it's tubin.
Yeah.
That's what we've decided with this.
I love how Viren was like, keep your answers to 60 to 90 seconds. Like, boom, 10 minutes on the first topic.
We're
going to do better. We're going to do better, Viren. We're talking about very relevant, very important stuff here. Okay, moving from beer to everybody's favorite marketing topic, artificial intelligence. Will artificial intelligence actually displace marketing jobs? If I'm into content and copywriting, do I need to be worried? Jenna, you left a comment on this question that says, Jenna votes for this one. Why does Jenna vote for this one?
Because it will take your job and you should be so fucking psyched about that. What content or copywriter person like goes into their job wanting to write content farm, churn and burn blog posts for like 10 cents a word, or that's ridiculously high for the going round. I don't actually know how these things get charged for anymore. Who wants that job? Like, that's not a good job. Like, it's the same thing. Like, it's a little bit different for me, like in my background, where I'm like, it is fucking fantastic that the AI is coming for entry-level media jobs. Early in my career, when I spent 20, 30, 40 hours a week like building campaign shells, or like, do you remember when we were in the London office and I literally melted out of my chair and cried on the floor because Excel crashed and I lost my bulk sheet upload? Who is sad or worried about losing that job? Yes, AI is absolutely going to take the bottom 70% of bullshit churn content production. Frankly, stuff that probably isn't ever actually read by humans anyway, given what a ridiculously large percentage of web traffic is absolutely bot fraud. And you should just be good at writing better than an AI can. So I don't know, like, get good is kind of like my answer. Like, yeah.
It is interesting. I mean, on the paid media side, that's certainly one thing. On the content side, I think, creatives sitting in ad agencies in New York and London, sure, that's not the type of work they want to do. But there are a lot of people that do that work in other parts of the world that might be more affected by this. Like having in the early days of Rival looked for a content writer being on Fiverr and things like that. A lot of those people, I can't speak for them, but probably are more interested in continuing to do that work. So I think that there is, obviously it's a massive industry. It's going to have a lot of implications that we can see, a lot that we can't. DuBose, what is your perspective on this?
I have one, but I'm mostly distracted that you just pulled the liberal bubble card on content writers. And we're like, yes, within our ivory tower of content writers in London, this is fine. But think about those in Arkansas. So, I mean, look, I've got two very strong feelings about this one. The first is Squarespace and Wix did not put web designers out of business. It just made a load of shit websites that then meant if you got a web designer, it clearly looks better. And I think at the same point, this is just going to raise the bar of kind of what crap copy can be. But then I think, the need for a person to bring creativity and flair to this, either through editorial of AI-generated content and kind of the creative direction of it, the little tweaks at the end, or just wholeheartedly taking the task that an AI is not going to be able to do well, it's just going to focus those. It's fine. It creates more need, not less. I think to the second point, as a junior planner, when I used to bring really important briefs to copywriters, and I was like, this is a great creative opportunity for you to write me 42 lines for PPC copy around buying bacon sandwiches at a petrol station, I think it's probably great we've eliminated that, because I don't think anyone was happy to be there when we were doing that, and I think we've eliminated that. So at the end of the day, I think the whole thing about this is, AI is going to take our jobs, but it's going to take the jobs we really fucking hate first. So I think, that direction of travel, I feel really great about.
Put that on a billboard somewhere. All right, moving on. Question number 3. Modern marketing is changing much faster than most marketers can fathom. It is becoming almost impossible to keep up. And here's where the question loses me a little bit, but I'm going to try to put my spin on it. Most firms will need to partner to utilize tools available. How should they prioritize their roadmap for these partnerships? So my interpretation of that question, how I want to tee it up to start with Jenna, I think this is talking about MarTech. It's something that we hear about a lot. There's an explosion of vendors, technologies, things out there in the MarTech landscape. It's impossible to keep up. How do you stay on top of it? And I don't know what they necessarily mean by partners. I don't know if that's consultancies to help navigate it or marketplaces that help surface the right vendors. But how should people be navigating everything that's going on with marketing technology these days?
Oh, I don't keep up with it. Like, that's like anybody who says that they do is lying, right? Like, there's just so many, like, thousands and thousands of vendors that do the same thing, right? Like, if I have to see another one of those, like, stupid, like, LinkedIn posts of, like, look at these, like, collection of logos that I've put, like, in these areas that, like, do, like, these particular things.
We had the guy on the podcast who does those, by the way. Yeah.
Oh, I love his work. Is he going to do one of people he hates, and it's just our faces in little quadrants?
Probably just my face.
Rocketing into the upper right of hatred.
I'm sure there are other people. You're just talking in general.
Yeah, like in general, you see those like all over the place where it's just like, look at all these logos that do all these things without like any kind of like qualitative assessment of how well they do these particular things. Yeah, one, I don't know. Like, I think like on a very like personal level, like I've psychologically had to make peace with the fact of like, oh, I really thought like I was an expert, in early in my career and like the features and functions of like Facebook ads, right? And now it's impossible, like with the different like types of ad tech and all those other things. So that's the first thing is like you just have to make peace with that like functional reality that we all live in right now. I think it's probably the same as like trying to like detox from the news that we're all constantly barraged with about like some new existential crisis that we all have to deal with as humans on Earth. But other than that, like I do think that it is, again, mostly than just developing like the ability to be like a lifelong learner, which I think can be one of those kind of like empty phrases. But again, more of like accepting the reality of it's no longer the case that, yeah, you can make your entire career like being like a DB360 or campaign manager like expert, where it was like even like 5 years ago, you could have done that like as a media buyer, like that could have been like your entire basis, like as a freelancer, with really rare exception for like some enterprise products. That's probably not going to be a viable career path anymore. And it's going to be much more about like, yeah, what is my evaluation criteria? How do I go source and like find new products like for novel applications? Or alternately, how do I deal with like getting feature adoption of the tools that I choose within my organization and a couple other things, because that's typically the biggest barrier to like the success of like tech implementation is how well you're actually using it. So I think it's like, yeah, just being like, all right, well, I'm not going to be keeping up with like the developments, but I can like, essentially like establish like a way for myself to be like, all right, how am I going to go figure out what looks good in the industry and what's going to work for me? Like we have a question later about like what's the best attribution tool. Like I have a couple of answers, but then I like did some like research and I'm like, oh shit, like I haven't heard of like some of these vendors that frankly look really awesome. And so it's like, all right, I just have time blocked out now to go scope them out kind of deal. It's not really a good punchy silver bullet soundbite answer other than just like, oh shit, it's tough, man. Yeah, I don't know.
We can probably pull something out of there. We can just like splice different words together from what you said.
Yeah.
But I think one point that you made that I want to draw out, because I hear this so many times of like we spent all this money on this new technology and nobody's actually using it, or we're not getting the value out of it that we thought we would. And then sometimes they even have to go get a different technology because they realize that that one was actually not fit for purpose for the people that they had. So at the end of the day, as we always say, best strategy, latest technology, doesn't matter if you don't have the right people set up in the right way to use it. So I think actually thinking through the people side of this and the process side of this, of what are you going to do with the technology, can actually help guide what the right solution should be for you. DuBose, thoughts from you?
I agree with Jenna that I think overall, when you're seeing an expansion of technologies in any field, the criteria by how which you judge those and being really clear on your need is going to be the thing that's most useful. I think for all of these things, there's always a sense of FOMO of I've missed out on the best of these, or I'll never know all of these. And the reality is, even at the slowest of times, you were probably missing something. I think it's more the idea of being very, very clear as an organization what you need, and then being able to find something that matches up with that need. It's not that there's the best or the newest or the most innovative. I think it's the one that fits the business as a whole, both culturally and through the organizational needs it's addressing. And I think that's the same for everything. That could be MarTech, that could be general technology, that could be anything. So I think being really clear on that is the important thing. I think on the whole idea of, oh my God, the world is speeding up and we're never going to be able to keep up with it. I think to add on Jenna's existential angst there, I think it was always moving quickly. I think just different bits of it are complex at different times. Like at the end of the day, marketing is a very straightforward game. You're trying to get someone to buy something or keep buying something. And so, that's not going to change anytime soon. I think we just put new words around it.
Just going back to the way the question is actually written to make sure I'm not missing anything. Is there like a partner? Like, is there a site? Is there something that people could be using to try to understand what's going on if it's not the giant image with all the logos that comes out once a year?
There are actually, there's like a good website that the name of which is completely escaping me right now that does do comparisons and like, and like consolidates reviews of like really common like MarTech like tools and use cases. I found it has some limitations in that like I don't think that the descriptions sometimes or like the categorizations of certain like tech products are like entirely right. But like I'll use it a lot for like feature comparison of like CDPs, right? Like there is a website that does that. I will remember what it was and we will put it in the show notes somewhere.
I will also put in the show notes. I'm going to make logo quadrants for everything in my life. I think like my favorite toothpaste, what I had for dinner this week.
One for favorite dogs.
Favorite dogs. We'll have a dog breed quadrant chart, just like.
Okay, but I'm not even referring to the ones like okay, because a quadrant, like on an axis, indicates like some level of analysis has been done to place these things like on some sorts of axes, right? Like according to their value.
Because I was going to go fluffiness and aggression.
The logo explosion.
I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this graphical mess? Like,
You're supposed to feel overwhelmed.
I guess.
Yeah. By the way, this doesn't make me. We've had some conversations about potentially a product that we could build around this.
Yes,
which
we have.
actually,
I just have other things to do.
Jenna's hands might be off camera, but she's going like this, which usually means she's thinking of something. Okay, moving on. How do you approach the challenge of marketing to a diverse and multicultural audience, and what steps do you take to ensure that your messaging is inclusive and culturally sensitive? I think this is meant as an example, but in parentheses, this person wrote FIFA 2022 in Qatar. DuBose.
I mean, I think there's a few things that have never really changed when it comes to marketing. I think the first of those is the best marketing in general puts themselves in the shoes of someone else. Like in psychology, I think they call it the phenomenological perspective. It's the idea of being able to understand the needs and the attitudes of another person. And I think, generally, let's get out of the way that most bad marketing comes from the perspective of what a person who makes it likes, not what the customer or consumer likes or needs. So there's that. I think the other thing I would say is, generally you have to accept that most large-scale marketing is going to anger someone. I think at the end of the day, the worst outcome is probably, and you're in the midst of this, if you're the Bud Light CEO, it's probably not the case. But, in general, the worst outcome probably isn't that someone's angry, it's that someone doesn't care at all. So I think giving value to a community, having a strong point of view, staking out an area is naturally going to alienate someone else. Like at the end of the day, having a trans influencer for Bud Light alienated Kid Rock. The powerful Kid Rock segment is now off the Bud Light train and probably, 4% of Detroit with it. But I think at the end of the day, is that worth it? That's kind of, the understanding of what you want to do as a brand, where growth is going to come from, and what value you want to provide to what community are key. I think something like FIFA is amazing, right? Because at the end of the day, I think even FIFA has come out and been like, ooh, a bit of a mulligan. It probably shouldn't have been in Qatar. So there is that. But let's assume that in all good faith, this was a really great thing we were all excited about. There's always going to be someone that's angry that it was there. So I think, the multicultural nature of marketing just means you need to have a wider understanding of who you're giving value to. But I think at the crux of this question is something I think we just have to lean into. Everything, if done right, is going to annoy or anger someone. Just accept it.
I'm sorry, was the FIFA backlash related to its multiculturalism or the fact that it was awarded via a briefcase full of cash process? I'm not familiar with something around a multicultural. What was this?
Well, it was a single cultural bribery focus. There wasn't a multicultural approach to bribery.
There was an issue of like our culture's our love for law and order. Yeah, a lack of diversity of corruption versus non-corruption. Oh, got it. Okay.
Why can't it be both? It's the largest football tournament in the world. It can be all of these things.
But I assume what this person is saying, and I don't know what business they're in, is that maybe their brand, or let's say as an example, their brand is a sponsor of the World Cup. You're probably marketing to a more multicultural, multi-segmented audience if you're kind of building on the back of that.
Yeah. So corrupt people and non-corrupt. No, I got no. Yeah, I don't know. Like, my perspective on this is, like I say, is always like in like digital distribution, and like a lot of times people like the most common thing that I used to get from clients of like being on paid socials, like, oh, we're getting really bad like comments on like this thing for an ad, even though the ad is like getting really, really great results. It's definitely, and again, I think it is the same thing with the Bud Light piece of like, okay, the most vocal minority is not always right, like the people who should be determining these things. It's response bias at its most basic kind of level. And then other than that, it's like, oh, well, if you're going to do multicultural marketing, to your point, if it's really about like an authentic representation of the lived experience of those people, yeah, like kind of maybe make sure that you do have people who actually understand that. I can't remember what it was, but there's been a couple because it's almost the end of Ramadan, right? And I think that there's generally been people doing a pretty good job in London. I've noticed of talking about breaking fast and like iftar and prepping for Eid celebrations and a couple other things, and not being I think too timid about it. But I think there's been a couple misses, and it's a little bit of like, ooh, who did you have writing these things? Did you have someone, a Muslim on your team? Double check this just to make sure. Maybe you should have done that. I don't know. That's my 2 cents.
All right. Moving on. So you foreshadowed this question earlier. What's the best tool to measure attribution? How do I set it up? I know all the theoretical stuff, but everything online is very overwhelming.
Yeah. This is tough because, again, like best is really such a subjective thing. And I hate giving like an agency person answer of, oh, it depends. It does depend. If you care about making sure that it plays really nicely with your enterprise level like software, as much as I might like to hate on Google, and I'm still short on Google in the year 2025 and also the year 2026, the Google product suite and like Google marketing of Campaign Manager and whatever else is still probably the best comprehensive like attribution and like media spending combination available on the market until the Department of Justice hopefully successfully unwinds that sale of DoubleClick and a couple other things. And when that day happens, maybe I'll answer differently. If you're a smaller company, there are, like I say, some like smaller providers that are a little bit more like privacy forward that do the same things. Heap is really great. Heap Analytics is a really good provider. I've also heard some pretty good things about Clicky, which is a really silly name. It's literally called Clicky, but it is actually, I think, a really good, a little bit more privacy forward kind of options. There's a couple others, like I said, that we can put in the show notes for this, but it really depends on like what your priorities are. If it really is about like accuracy, like an attribution, versus if it's like, hey, you're being a little bit more privacy focused and you have data limitations and restrictions in what your advertising like is doing, or you want something more open source because that's important to you, we'll put some options in the show notes. Yeah.
All right. DuBose, anything to add, or should we move on to the last question?
The best attribution tool is one that helps you understand what you actually want to get out of saying attribution, because I think a lot of the time it becomes one of those suitcase words that everyone thinks is going to solve everything, and I think you probably need to figure out what you mean by it first. The only other thing I have to add is Clicky is the best name for anything that is serious. I think you're pulling our I don't think that exists.
I swear to God,
next you're
it's
gonna
really
be
called that.
The best attribution tool is Measure Maboo, and it is
really
incredible.
Called that. It's really called that. It's really called
Data
that.
Jeezy and
Matomo is another really good one. Matomo. I don't know that I'm saying that right. I also found out.
These aren't serious people.
No, that's like a real. That's like a real.
That one's
name.
okay. That was okay. I won't go Logan Roy on that. Fine, it's the other one.
I did find out when I was at Matches the other day that I was been pronouncing what I thought was Loe, Loewee, is not pronounced that way. It's Loewe.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, I had Lowe.
Yeah, it's Loewe or something. So I said this really premium high fashion brand wrong in front of an entire floor of like premium like fashion econ people, all of whom turned to look at me and go, Jenna, it's Loewe. I'm like, oh, okay. Oh,
were you wearing the rival hoodie?
Yes,
the whole time? Yes, so that's all right. I mean,
yeah.
We have our own clothes. We don't need yours.
I am the worst dressed person in that entire office, to no one's surprise. Yeah.
Own it. All right. Last question. And I love that somebody submitted this. Can you share your experience with working with external marketing agencies and vendors? I don't think we have any opinions on that. We love all agencies.
No one hates every other agency more than I do. This is so hard because I have so much to say about this. I obviously have so many friends and really very truly as a realist.
Great people who work at advertising agencies.
There really absolutely are. It's it's probably the number one reason why I still work in marketing despite shitting on it all the time about its abusive privacy practices and the behaviors of its large corporations and its working conditions and all those other things. The people in marketing absolutely are fucking amazing, right? And there genuinely are some agencies that are doing really good quality work for their clients that are well-intentioned, that do all these really great things. And I know that we absolutely do all the things that I'm just about to like shit on other people for doing. We do them absolutely all the time. Of course we do. But oh my fucking God, what a ridiculous like group of people. If I have to sit through another pitch where I hear a media agency go, we're not like other media agencies, we have engineers on staff. My brother in Christ, it is the year 2023. Every media agency has or should have engineers of some kind on staff. That is the reality of the world that we live in. I, generally speaking, I think 80% of agencies, I think, and like other like external vendor partners are just full of shit. Full stop. I think 80%, definitely. Yeah.
Can I just throw out there, my pet peeve with agency pitch decks are the ones that start with that slide that says the year they were founded. We may or may not have worked at an agency that used to do that. And I presented that slide, but oh my God. And I saw somebody posted this on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago. I don't know who it was, but it kind of went viral. It's so good. It's like nobody gives a shit what year you were founded. But it does, having gone from 10 years in advertising agencies and then coming into a product business here at 11FS for a while, and being involved in building product using a jobs to be done framework that basically works backwards from what's the need of the customer, and that's the product you build, or in marketing, that's the story you want to tell. It's so obvious. The customer, the client, doesn't give a shit when your agency was founded, how many people it has to a certain extent, and all those things that most agency pitch decks have in the upfront. I actually don't know if we're answering this question for this person because I'm guessing that they actually want to know how to find or work with a good agency, but we just had to get this off of our chest. My point with this is I think it's important if you are an agency, because I know we have some agency people listening, make sure that your pitch deck and what you're saying, one, is a reflection of your understanding of the industry, that you are not differentiated if you have an engineer or engineering on staff, and two, tell the story for the needs of the customer, not what you think is important or what is important to you from your perspective internally.
I think it's funny, right? What was it? After the Challenger space shuttle explosion, they did a study at NASA, and they went, how can you get so many smart people together and miss some of the errors that caused it to explode, or I think what happened? And they basically called it groupthink. And I think there must be like a special version of that in advertising where you can take the individual people who work together and seem rational and sane and wonderful. And then you put 10 of them in a pitch room and they're going to make a presentation that is going to have at least one thing that's either an engineer on staff. We sit at the intersection of data and creativity. That's always quite a good one. That is a very, very busy intersection. That is the intellectual hate and Ashbury of kind of just every agency. Intellectual hate. I think overall, to the point, are there good agencies? Yes, there are amazing ones. Are they the ones that take themselves less seriously? Yes, because then they just get on with it. Just get on with it. At the end of the day, the best pitch deck is one that has great work and good outcomes. And they'll overlook the idea, if you do that you probably still start with, we were founded 3 years ago. Here's a picture of our 4 founders. We definitely have that slide.
We need that. They need that.
We need a better one of those.
People do care how many people you have, though. People do care.
To a certain extent. They need to know whether you are a boutique, whether you're mid-size, or whether you're scale. Okay, I'm going to take a stab at trying to answer it. If this question is coming from the perspective of like, what do I think about when I'm trying to find a good agency? So first of all, what I would say is, and it's part of the reason that we set up Rival to be a consulting firm and not an advertising agency. Part of it was just we couldn't bear to do that again. But also, we really believe that marketing should be in-housed. That should be the default for most organizations. The question should be should not be what agency do I need? It should be, can I build this function in-house? And if not, for a lot of different reasons, financial reasons, specialization reasons, bandwidth reasons, you might need to go for an external vendor. But I think it's important to start, or I would suggest that you kind of start there. Could you do this in-house instead? Because then you get the benefit of marketing actually contributing to the learnings within the team and the organization overall, plus the cost benefits and not having to work with shitty agency people. The second thing I would say is that at the end of the day, agencies are about the people, not the name on the door. So just because you're talking to a certain agency doesn't mean that the people in that room are going to be actually working on your business, and that's really the only thing that matters. So it's important to understand not who are the partners or the CEOs that come in to pitch you, but who are the people that are actually going to be working on your business, because they're the ones that are going to deliver or not deliver the value. So those are 2 things that I would throw out there. And yeah, there are shit agencies, there are great agencies, just like if you're hiring for your own team. There are going to be shit people and there are going to be great people. And it is tough to find them, but those are some of the things that have worked well for me. Anything else?
I mean, I would say, I think one of the things I would find is, we say this a lot, but pitching is absolutely fundamentally broken. So therefore, it brings the worst out of agencies. I think we created a unique situation where we try to evaluate people quickly on some random kind of bits of chemistry. And that is obviously presenting decks and creating decks that are absolutely ludicrous. So what I would say is, if you want to find a good agency, change the way that you evaluate them. Just go hang out with some people and talk to them about business. Don't.
Well, I would build on that. So I totally agree, as you know, and this is why we don't do pitching. I totally agree that the pitch process is broken. It's creating an artificial situation, saying, hey, I'm going to give you a usually obnoxiously short amount of time to answer your question in a way that is probably not realistic to what you would actually do. And by the way, it's not going to be the people that are actually going to work on your business. It's going to be the creative director and the CEO. It's going to be the top team that's going to work on the pitch. And then they're going to bring somebody else in after. So it's completely broken. Also for an agency, as a business model, your best people and so much of your costs are going towards pitching, which takes away from the value that you can deliver to actually paying clients. And that's a huge reason that we don't do it as well. But I do think that it's important, much like if you were hiring for your own team, to, if you're considering an agency, if you're running some type of process to find a partner, have some type of task or some type of deliverable that you work on with them together. But make sure that it's the people that are actually going to work on the business. I would really recommend that you pay the people for their time. Such a crazy concept, I know, like pay people for time if you're looking for ideas and output from them. So I do think that the traditional pitch process is broken. The process of, get to know people, sit down with them, understand how they think, but also something that resembles what you're actually going to have them do.
I think to that point, if you want the most effective pitch question of all time, choose a really crap restaurant near the headquarters where you're holding the pitch. Look directly at the creative director who's just finished the presentation and say, next time you come out here to work for the day, we'll go to that restaurant. If they look at you with a look of abject terror on their face, I think they probably meant they're probably going to come back at some point. If they're not worried at all, you are never going to see that person again. So at the end of the day, figure out a way to see who already is out the door and who's actually going to be.
I thought the most effective pitch question of all time was, would you rather fight one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses?
I mean, anyone who says one horse-sized duck is definitely overestimating their ability to fight.
Yeah, that's like that. That's the like
that's
people
history's
who think
greatest
they could
monster.
Take bear, that could take a bear in.
Have you seen a horse? Like a horse is really big.
Yeah, I'm saying a duck-sized horse, 100 duck-sized horses is the way better option. It's the
Oh,
way
oh,
smarter
okay.
option.
Neither is good. Like the option I would like to choose is to get out of whatever genetic wasteland we're in that are creating these nightmare animals.
Good. All right, Farron, we can knock that question off the list, the duck-sized horse and horse-sized duck question. Glad that we got to that one. Okay, really quick because we're running way over on time. Rants and Raves, 30 seconds. What you got?
Gosh, so I would love to, well, it's a bit of a rant, but about the most recent Lithuania tourism campaign. It's an interesting one. If you haven't seen it, we'll put it in the show notes. They basically used artificial intelligence to create these fantasy landscapes where they go, this is kind of Lithuania. You should come check out the real one. And like, I love the spirit of it. I love the, yay, we're going to do something new. If no one knows what Lithuania looks like, my bro, do not lead with the Lord of the Rings landscape. It's funny. You can do fantasy and tourism and not go this far out. Like if you look at the Wales campaign from a few years back, it was kind of like Wales' land of Game of Thrones, basically. It did a nice balance of this is what you're getting from the country and still having a bit of excitement. I love the fact that they were like, let's give it a go. I hate the execution of it. And I think Lithuania is a wonderful place. Just show Lithuania.
That's terrifying. That's absolutely terrifying. I would absolutely not go to a country that was like, well, here's an AI version. Just come see the real thing. I think not. I think that's the worst.
That's the boiler room of travel is what that is.
What's behind curtain number 2? I think not. Rave, Wild Type Foods. If we can find somebody from Wild Type Foods who's listening, please put me to the top of your wait list. They do sell cultured fish, salmon specifically. Their content looks so delicious. They make it's not fake. I shouldn't call it fake salmon, but it is. It's that cell constructed, cell engineered, lab grown salmon. I really want it. I feel bad about eating animals because, again, of the existential crisis and hellscape and dystopia that we all live in these days. I want to eat guilt-free salmon in particular, and this is also controversial. Scottish salmon is not as good as Pacific Northwest salmon, which is where I'm from, and I want this kind of alternative. Please, wild-type salmon, please, or wild-type foods, please put me to the top of the wait list. And also, everybody should check out their marketing. It's really great. They celebrate the ingredient. They really celebrate salmon, talk about how much they love it, and make their product look really, really beautiful. Yeah.
Okay, I just looked them up on LinkedIn. I'm going to reach out to a couple of people. A lot of them weirdly have food-related last names.
Nominative determinism. Nominative determinism.
John Toast has been waiting his entire life to disrupt this industry.
Yeah.
All right, that's all we got for you today. Hopefully, enjoyed the new format. We certainly did. Catch us in 2 weeks. Please submit your questions, LinkedIn, in the AMP WhatsApp group. If you haven't joined, by the way, hit us up and we'll get you added to that. We'd love to hear what other questions you want us to answer. Have a good day.
Punchy is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with Jenna, DuBose, or myself, email us at media@wearerival.com or find us on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.